Thank you very much, Konstantin. Thank you, and hello everybody. It's very good to meet you everyone in person again. I have a special thought for all those who are behind bars now and who I'm used to seeing usually in these gatherings. It's difficult to wrap up all these three very well complementing each other presentations. I'd like to stress four elements which I think are critical to our discussion. First, I think it's good to remind all the time that the demonstrations that have taken place in Belarus for over 1.5 years now have been in great majority peaceful. We should not let the acting government claim otherwise, and this is what they are doing actually. So in spite of whatever the government claims, what this movement will be remembered for in the future in the history book and sociology books is the fact that it was and remains peaceful. This leads me to my second point. This society, in spite of all the huge, unprecedented challenges, has remained resilient. And here we all have to really acknowledge and congratulate all the individuals and the associations which, under extremely difficult, structurally constraining circumstances created by legislation, which, as you know, has been limiting the right to freedom of association for more than 2 decades, well, all these people are giving still a lot of themselves to make their basic fundamental rights being heard and respected. Third point is that repression is going on. We shouldn't forget this. It was not only in August 2020, it's going on. It's becoming more, I would say, subtle in a way that it aims at destroying civil society as a whole. In a climate of total arbitrariness, and the other panelists have reminded very well of this беззаконие, which reigns in Belarus, which makes any kind of process of transition towards peace and stability and possibly change, democratic change, very much difficult. You cannot trust any institution in the country nowadays, not the police, not the justice system. And my fourth point, which would be the main one, is the issue of impunity, which has been raised by other panelists. The crimes that have been committed, the human rights violations which we have been informed about, and which my office has been informed about as Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Belarus of the UN, the allegations are extremely serious. We are talking about grave human rights violations which have been conducted in a massive and deliberate way. So the challenges ahead, I see three of them. First, there is still a humanitarian dimension to this crisis, and I keep on reminding it to the stakeholders and the governments, the representatives who are maybe here with us today, diplomats, etc. The health, the well-being, and the basic rights of those who are still being arbitrarily detained remains a key issue in terms of human rights. As you know, there are more than 800 people who are being arbitrarily detained for political reasons. Earlier, Vladimir Karamurza mentioned that there were 412 in Russia, where in Belarus, where a country which is 14 times smaller in population, you actually have twice more so-called political prisoners. My Monday doesn't have the right to use that term, so people in prison for their political opinions. But there are much more victims than this because of intimidation, of reprisals against relatives, because of the atmosphere in general which has led so many to seek exile abroad. And this trend, which is very well documented in the communication that Simon just mentioned, this forced exile of thousands, tens of thousands of people, means that these people, while they may feel that they are in safety abroad, and Mr. Lukashenko recently mentioned that they shouldn't feel safe abroad, they still need psychological support to overcome the consequences of what they have been going through, what they know their relatives are going through in detention or while staying in Belarus, waiting for being arrested. So I think that diplomats should tirelessly request news from the prisoners, demand to visit them, and of course all the initiatives that lead to lending them attention and reminding of their fate is extremely important because they need this support. The second challenge I see is how to stop impunity. And here I would like to remind that there are at least two, from what I know, accountability mechanisms which are underway internationally. The first one was launched as a continuation, as a follow-up to Professor Benedek's report within the OST Moscow mechanism. It led to the establishment of an international accountability platform for Belarus, and an organization, a Danish NGO, is gathering evidence which can be made available then to judges to prosecute the alleged crimes, possibly crimes against humanity that have been perpetrated in Belarus. The second mechanism, which I'm more familiar with, because it's taking place at the level of the UN, is the so-called OHCHR examination on Belarus, which was launched following the resolution 46/20 at the Human Rights Council, adopted in March after the presentation of the High Commission's report on the situation of human rights in Belarus. I draw your attention on paragraph 13 of that resolution, which empowers, requests the High Commissioner, with the help of special procedures mandate holders, myself and other thematic rapporteurs, and the help of independent experts, to gather, consolidate, and analyze the data, the evidence, the circumstances under which these serious violations have taken place, with a view at holding the perpetrators to account and providing justice for the victims. So of course, the OHCHR doesn't have a judiciary mission, neither do I, but we are very satisfied that this mechanism has been launched in spite of the frustration that it is, as usual at the UN, underfunded and understaffed. But it's the first step towards gathering all this evidence, because, well, actually, people from Vyazma here, we all know how much they have been doing to gather the evidence. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. The data is here, the facts are here. The only thing we need to do now is first to secure them, because we know it's individual, private data which can be used against the very victims in the climate of reprisal. So we have really to secure that they are kept in a safe server and not misused. And second, make it available to the mechanisms that will, in fact, according to the universal jurisdiction or potentially at the International Criminal Court, lead to the adjudication of these cases and possibly to the conviction of the identification and conviction of the perpetrators. So I could only support the statement that was made by Simon about the fact that states should send state referrals to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court in support of the communication that has been sent to him in May, because that's the first way towards making the people responsible accountable for their crimes. Lastly, что делать? I think that there should be more and better coordination between those representatives of civil society and political opposition abroad. There should be better coordination between the two mechanisms that I just mentioned. Unfortunately, it is still lacking, and well, the problem here is that there is a risk of overlapping competences, and well, we at the UN, we claim that the first thing is that we should do no harm, and I believe that if a victim of a human rights violation, whether it's torture or rape, is interrogated more than once, it's already too much, and people have already delivered their statements, their evidence and their testimonies to Vyazma in August, September last year. Then they would do it again for more investigators. This is, again, it can be problematic. And lastly, I would like that the international community acknowledge that the government of Belarus has crossed too many red lines and has been absolutely deaf to all recommendations made by international human rights mechanism, not only my own mandate, which it doesn't recognize, as you know, and that we should remember that the first calls for an international conference on the situation of human rights in Belarus should be renewed. The first calls, from what I remember, date back to the report written by the first Special Rapporteur of the UN on Belarus, which was Adrian Severin, who in 2006 already called the international community to hold a pan-conference on involving the OSCE, the Council of Europe, and potentially also the European Union. I think this call is still very much topical today. Thank you, and sorry for being here.
Please stay over there. Merci beaucoup. I have a question to you, actually, to start discussing what we've heard. And the question is actually about what Simon Popoashvili said about using more universal jurisdictions, countries with universal jurisdiction, their law systems, to pursue the Lukashenko regime. To what extent do you think it is feasible? And do you have any ideas about how it can be put in practice, if at all?
Well, of course, it depends on which countries do recognize this in their own legislation.
United States of America.
First, that's the first step. And secondly, we're talking about democratic countries where the justice system is independent from the executive. So I don't see how governments could encourage, more than they already do, judges to take over these issues. But the reality, it's a bit paradoxical, but it's an opportunity. Currently, there are thousands and thousands of Belarusians who are in forced exile abroad, here in Poland, in Lithuania, in the Czech Republic, in Germany, etc. So in a way, it facilitates communication with them in a safe way. I stress this is extremely important. And it makes it possible for them to seek justice, which they could not expect to have in the current administration of justice in Belarus.
Thanks a million.